In the heart of rural America, on a stretch of road that seemed to lead nowhere, there was a gas station. The nearest town was miles away, and the station was the only beacon of light for travelers navigating the desolate highway. It was an old, weathered building with a flickering neon sign that buzzed incessantly. The pumps were outdated, the convenience store was dimly lit, and the parking lot was cracked and overgrown with weeds. Yet, for those who needed fuel or a quick snack on their journey, it was a necessary stop. Brown, the middle-aged man who operated this lonely outpost, had been working there for the last 15 years. His once vibrant life had slowly faded into the monotonous routine of managing the station. Brown wasn't always this isolated. He had once been a family man, living in the city with his wife and daughter. But tragedy struck when his daughter died in a car accident. The grief tore his family apart, leading to his divorce and eventual retreat to this remote gas station, where he could escape the painful memories. The isolation suited him at first, providing solace from the outside world. But as the years passed, the loneliness began to take its toll. Brown's only company was the old radio behind the counter, which crackled with static more often than it played music. The few travelers who stopped by were just brief interactions, reminders of the world he had left behind. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the parking lot, a car pulled in. Brown watched from behind the counter as the vehicle, a dusty old sedan, rolled to a stop by the pumps. The driver was a man in his late 30s, with a disheveled appearance and eyes that seemed haunted by something Brown couldn't quite place. The man got out, glanced around nervously, and then walked into the store. He approached the counter, his hands trembling slightly as he handed Brown a $20 bill for gas. There was something off about him, something that made Brown's skin crawl. The man didn't say much, only muttered a quick thanks before hurrying back to his car. As he drove away, Brown couldn't shake the feeling that he had seen the man before, though he couldn't place where or when. That night, Brown found it difficult to sleep. He kept replaying the encounter in his mind, trying to recall why the man seemed so familiar. His thoughts drifted back to his daughter, wondering if the man had somehow been connected to the accident, though he knew that was impossible. As he finally drifted off to sleep, his dreams were filled with images of the man, his haunted eyes staring back at him from the darkness, mingled with the echo of his daughter's laughter. The following days passed in a blur of monotony. Brown continued his routine, but the encounter with the strange man lingered in his thoughts. Then, one evening, just as the sun was setting again, a familiar car pulled into the station. It was the same dusty sedan, and the same man stepped out. Brown's heart raced as he watched the man approach the counter, his hands trembling just as they had before. $20, the man said, handing over the bill with the same nervousness as before. Brown stared at him, his mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. It was as if the entire encounter was repeating itself. The man's voice, his mannerisms, even the exact amount of money, it was all identical to their first meeting. Brown wanted to say something, to ask the man if they had met before, but the words caught in his throat. As the man left, Brown felt a deep unease. The sense of familiarity grew stronger, but he couldn't pinpoint why. He began to suspect that something was terribly wrong, that perhaps he was losing his mind. That night, his dreams were more intense, filled with not just the man, but also shadows creeping into the edges of his vision, whispers that he couldn't understand, and a feeling of being watched. As the days turned into weeks, Brown noticed a pattern emerging. The man in the dusty sedan began appearing at the station every few days, always at the same time, always with the same nervous demeanor. It was as if he was caught in some kind of loop, repeating the same actions over and over again. Brown became obsessed with trying to understand what was happening. He started keeping a journal, meticulously noting each visit, the time, The weather, even the clothes the man was wearing. But it wasn't just the man in the sedan. Soon, other strange occurrences began to happen. A woman in a red dress, who always seemed to be crying, started coming to the station at odd hours, buying nothing but a single pack of cigarettes. A truck driver with a scar across his face would pull in, fill up his tank, and then sit in his cab for hours, staring blankly at the station before driving off without a word. Each of these visitors seemed eerily familiar to Brown, as if he had seen them all before in some forgotten dream. He began to suspect that the gas station was somehow trapped in time, or that he was reliving the same events over and over. The repetition of their visits, their behavior, and the growing sense of déjà vu began to wear on him. He found himself unable to sleep, his nights filled with nightmares that left him drenched in sweat. The boundary between his waking life and his dreams began to blur, and he could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. As Brown's sanity began to fray, he started to hear things whispers in the corners of the station, faint murmurs that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. At first, he dismissed them as tricks of the mind, a result of his exhaustion. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they became impossible to ignore. The whispers seemed to speak directly to him, calling his name, telling him things he didn't want to hear. They spoke of his daughter, of her tragic death, and how he had abandoned his wife, blaming her for what happened. They reminded him of his failures, his loneliness, and his guilt. Brown would spin around, expecting to see someone standing behind him, but he was always alone. The shadows in the store seemed to stretch and twist in unnatural ways, moving of their own accord. Objects would shift slightly when he wasn't looking, only to return to their original positions when he glanced back. Brown began to feel as though the station itself was alive, watching him, feeding off his fear. The most disturbing part was the sense that the station was trying to tell him something, that it wanted him to understand. But what? The whispers would speak in riddles, their words overlapping and intertwining, creating a cacophony that left Brown's mind reeling. He knew he was losing his grip on reality, but he couldn't stop himself from listening, from trying to decipher the messages hidden within the noise. One night, as Brown sat behind the counter, trying to focus on the mundane task of inventory, the lights began to flicker. The temperature in the store dropped suddenly, and the air became thick with a sense of impending doom. Brown's hands shook as he fumbled with his pen, dropping it onto the counter. When he bent down to pick it up, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Reflected in the glass of the counter was not his own face, but the face of the man in the dusty sedan, his haunted eyes staring back at him. Brown jerked back, but when he looked up, the reflection was gone. He was alone again, but the fear that gripped him was suffocating. The rest of the night passed in a haze of terror. Brown couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that something was lurking just beyond his sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. He could hear the whispers growing louder, more aggressive, and he knew he was losing his grip on reality. The next morning, Brown found himself standing in front of the station, unsure of how he had gotten there. The building looked different, more dilapidated, as if it had aged decades overnight. The pumps were rusted, the windows cracked, and the once bright neon sign was now barely legible. Brown's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing, but nothing made sense anymore. The days and nights began to blend together, an endless cycle of fear and confusion. Brown's journal entries became more frantic, his handwriting barely legible as he tried to document the increasingly bizarre events. The man in the sedan, the woman in the red dress, the truck driver, they all continued to visit the station, their appearances more frequent, their actions more unsettling. Brown's health deteriorated rapidly. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping, consumed by the need to understand what was happening to him. He would spend hours staring at the security footage from the station, hoping to catch a glimpse of the strange visitors, but the tapes always showed the same thing: nothing. The figures he was so sure had been there didn't appear on the screen, as if they were figments of his imagination. But Brown knew they were real. He could feel their presence, even when he couldn't see them. The whispers never ceased, filling his mind with dark thoughts and terrible images. He began to see things in the mirror's faces, figures, shadows that moved on their own. Every time he tried to confront them, they would vanish, leaving him questioning his sanity even more. One particularly cold night, as Brown sat huddled in the back office, trying to warm himself with a cup of coffee, he noticed something strange about the journal. The entries were changing. Words he hadn't written appeared on the pages, scrawled in a shaky hand. The messages were cryptic, warning him to leave the station, to run before it was too late. But it was already too late. Brown could feel it in his bones. He was trapped, just like the visitors who seemed to be caught in a loop, repeating their actions over and over. The realization hit him like a freight train. This had all happened before. He was reliving some nightmarish cycle, a curse that bound him to the station. Just like the others, the final entry in the journal, one he didn't remember writing, simply read, "The station will take you to." Brown's mind raced as he tried to understand what this meant. The station, was it alive? Was it some kind of purgatory, a place where the lost souls of the damned were trapped forever? He remembered the man in the sedan, the sorrow in his eyes, the way he always seemed to be running from something. And the woman in the red dress, was she mourning someone she had lost, just as he mourned his daughter? The station was feeding off their pain, their fear. It was a place of darkness, where time and reality twisted into something monstrous. And now it had claimed him too. Brown stared at the words on the page, his breath catching in his throat. "The station will take you to." What did that mean? Who had written it? He flipped back through the pages, trying to make sense of the handwriting. It was his, but it wasn't. The letters were jagged and erratic, as if written by someone in a frenzy. He could barely recognize his own script. The air in the office grew colder. The walls seemed to close in around him. Brown's mind raced as he tried to piece together the puzzle. What was happening to him? Why was he caught in this endless loop of terror? The questions swirled in his head unanswered, driving him closer to the brink of madness. The whispers returned, louder than ever before. They filled his ears, his mind, until he couldn't think straight. He covered his ears with his hands, trying to block them out, but they seeped through, relentless. They spoke of death, of doom, of the inescapable fate that awaited him. The shadows on the walls seemed to move, twisting into grotesque shapes, reaching out for him. Brown couldn't take it anymore. He stumbled out of the office, into the main area of the station. The lights flickered ominously, casting long shadows that danced around him. He felt as if he was being watched from every corner, every darkened nook of the station. The station itself seemed to be alive, breathing, waiting. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, the sound echoing in his ears like a countdown to something terrible. Brown's heart pounded in his chest as he backed away from the counter, his eyes darting around the room. He had to get out of there, but every time he approached the door, a sense of dread washed over him, freezing him in place. Just as Brown was about to make a run for it, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror behind the counter. He stopped in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. The reflection staring back at him was not his own. It was the man in the dusty sedan, his haunted eyes boring into Brown's soul. Brown's blood ran cold. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, but the reflection didn't change. The man's face remained, twisted into an expression of sorrow and fear. Slowly, the man in the mirror raised his hand, pressing it against the glass. Brown felt a cold shiver run down his spine as he mirrored the movement. placing his own hand against the glass. The mirror was icy to the touch, and as soon as Brown's fingers made contact, a shock ran through him. Images flooded his mind, flashes of the gas station in flames, the faces of the visitors twisted in agony, and the final horrifying image of his own lifeless body lying amidst the rubble. He jerked his hand back, gasping for air as the vision faded. The man in the mirror smiled, a sad, knowing smile, before the glass suddenly cracked, a spiderweb of fractures spreading across its surface. Brown stumbled back, his heart racing. The reflection distorted and twisted before his eyes, until it shattered completely, the glass raining down around him. Brown collapsed to his knees, his body trembling. He didn't know what to do, where to go. The station had him in its grip, and there was no escape. The thought of running never crossed his mind anymore. He knew, deep down, that the station was a part of him now, just as he was a part of it. In the days that followed, Brown fell deeper into his madness. He became a ghost of his former self, barely eating, barely sleeping. The strange visitors continued to come, each one more unsettling than the last. They all had the same haunted look in their eyes, the same sense of déjà vu that Brown couldn't shake. One night, as he was sitting behind the counter, barely holding on to his sanity, the door opened, and a familiar figure stepped inside. It was the man in the dusty sedan, his face even more drawn and pale than before. Brown's heart pounded in his chest as the man approached the counter. $20. The man said, his voice a hollow echo of the first time Brown had heard it. Brown stared at him, his mind racing. "Why do you keep coming back?" he finally asked, his voice trembling. The man looked at him with those haunted eyes, and for a moment it seemed like he might answer. But instead, he just handed over the bill, turned, and walked out of the store. Brown watched him go, a sense of helplessness washing over him. He wanted to stop the man, to shake him and demand answers, but he couldn't move. As the man drove away, Brown felt a sudden compulsion to follow him. He grabbed his keys, locked up the station, and got into his own car. The road ahead was dark, the only light coming from the headlights of the man's sedan in the distance. Brown pressed down on the gas pedal, his car roaring to life as he sped after the man. The drive felt like it lasted for hours, the road stretching endlessly before him. The landscape around him was shrouded in darkness, nothing but an empty void. Brown kept his eyes fixed on the taillights of the sedan, refusing to let it out of his sight. But no matter how fast he drove, the distance between them never seemed to close. Suddenly, the sedan's taillights disappeared, and Brown slammed on the brakes, his car skidding to a stop. He looked around, but there was no sign of the car, no sign of the road even. He was completely alone, surrounded by an impenetrable darkness. Brown's heart raced as he realized he had no idea where he was. He got out of the car, the silence pressing in on him like a weight. The air was thick with the scent of gasoline, and Brown's footsteps echoed ominously as he walked around the car, searching for any sign of the sedan. But there was nothing, just endless darkness. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. It was the man in the sedan, but his face was no longer haunted. It was twisted into a grotesque grin, his eyes burning with an unnatural light. Brown stumbled back, fear gripping him as the man slowly approached. "You can't escape," the man whispered, his voice echoing in the void. "The station has you now." Before Brown could react, the ground beneath him gave way, and he was falling through darkness, through endless nothingness, until he crashed back into his body, jolting awake in the station. The station was eerily quiet as Brown awoke, his heart still racing from the nightmare. Or had it been a nightmare? It all felt so real, the drive, the man, the fall. But here he was, back in the station, as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. The whispers were louder now, more distinct, as if they were coming from just behind him. Brown turned slowly, expecting to see the man from the sedan, but there was no one there. He looked around the station, his eyes darting from one shadow to the next. The lights flickered ominously, casting eerie shapes on the walls. Brown knew he wasn't alone. He could feel them. The visitors, the shadows, the station itself, all watching him, waiting. He stumbled to the door, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the lock. He had to get out, had to leave before it was too late. But as he pulled the door open, a blast of icy wind hit him, forcing him back inside. The door slammed shut behind him, trapping him in the station once more. Brown backed away, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The walls seemed to close in around him, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. He felt as if the station was alive, pulsating with a dark energy that he couldn't escape. Then the lights went out, plunging the station into darkness. Brown's heart skipped a beat as he stood there, frozen in place. He could hear the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching him from all sides. The whispers turned into voices, clear and malicious, taunting him, mocking him. "You're ours now, Brown," they hissed. "You can't escape." Brown turned in circles trying to find the source of the voices, but there was nothing but darkness. He felt something brush against his arm, cold and clammy, and he jumped back, a scream tearing from his throat. The voices laughed, a low, sinister sound that sent shivers down his spine. Brown's mind raced, trying to think of a way out, but there was none. The station had him, just as it had the others, and it wasn't going to let him go. Then, from the darkness, a bright light flared, blinding him. Brown shielded his eyes, his heart pounding in his chest. When the light dimmed, he saw them, the visitors, all of them, standing in a circle around him. The man in the sedan, the woman in the red dress, the truck driver, they were all there, their faces twisted into expressions of terror and sorrow. "You can't leave," the man in the sedan whispered, his voice echoing in the dark. "We're all trapped here forever." Brown shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "No," he whispered. "I can't stay here. I won't." But it was too late. The station began to shake, the ground trembling beneath his feet. The voices grew louder, more frantic, as the walls began to close in around him. Brown fell to his knees, clutching his head as the station's energy surged, pulling him deeper into its grasp. Then, with a deafening roar, the station exploded. The blast sent Brown flying through the air, his body slamming into the ground with a bone-crunching thud. He lay there, gasping for air, his vision fading as the station burned around him. As his life slipped away, Brown saw the visitors standing over him, their faces now calm, peaceful. They reached out to him, their hands glowing with a soft, ethereal light. Brown felt himself being lifted, the pain and fear melting away as he was pulled into the light. The station burned to the ground, its cursed energy finally released. But Brown's soul, like the souls of the others, was forever bound to that lonely stretch of highway, a ghostly echo of the horrors that had taken place there. The next morning, a passerby noticed the smoldering ruins of the gas station and called the authorities. By the time they arrived, there was nothing left but charred rubble and the lingering smell of gasoline. The cause of the explosion was never determined, and the remains of Brown and the others were never found. But those who knew of the station and its dark history whispered of the curse that had claimed so many lives. They spoke of the strange visitors, the haunting whispers, and the final terrifying explosion that had erased the station from the map. The road where the station once stood became a place of legend, where travelers avoided stopping at night, fearing the ghosts that were said to haunt the area. Some claimed to have seen the spirits of Brown and the others wandering the ruins, their eyes filled with sorrow and regret. And for those who were brave enough to stop, they would hear the whispers on the wind, the echoes of the station's dark past. The legend of the gas station grew, becoming a cautionary tale told by truckers and travelers alike, a reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows, waiting for those who dared to stray too far from the beaten path. In the end, Brown's story became just another chapter in the long history of haunted places, a warning to those who might be tempted to explore the unknown. For the gas station was more than just a building, it was a trap, a place where time and reality twisted into something monstrous, claiming the souls of all who entered. And so the highway remained empty, a desolate stretch of road where no one dared to stop, where the memory of Brown and the cursed station lingered in the air, a ghostly presence that would never fade. The gas station was gone, but its dark legacy lived on, forever etched into the minds of those who knew the truth. And for Brown, his fate was sealed, trapped in the endless night, forever haunted by the echoes of the past. Stories 2. Darren was 37 years old, a man who had spent most of his life in solitude. From a young age, he had grown up with dark thoughts, feeling different from others, and had been ostracized by society. Childhood traumas, the violence from his father, and his mother's indifference had left deep scars on Darren's soul. Over time, these wounds turned into a dark quest for power. In his youth, Darren found solace in dark books to calm his inner turmoil. Gradually, his interest in ancient and mysterious texts became an obsession, and he began to try the dark rituals described in these books in the real world. But these attempts were merely thoughts swirling in his mind until he began working at an old gas station. This station was located on a desolate road, far from the city. For Darren, it was the perfect hiding place. He spent his days here, sinking into solitude at night. But the darkness within him deepened with each passing night. Darren's mind was constantly filled with the same thoughts. The desire to control and dominate others grew stronger by the day. He no longer wanted to live an ordinary life. For him, this world was a place where people suffered and the weak were destroyed. Every morning when he looked in the mirror, the deep lines on his face and his pale skin reminded him of his own inner decay. But this image also gave him strength, a strength fed by the fear and suffering of others. Darren's inner voice: "My power lies in their fears. I will hunt them down like a dark predator." Darren was now searching for ways to satisfy these dark desires within him. Although his daily routine appeared ordinary, each day he thought about his next victim. For him, selecting a victim was a task that needed to be done meticulously. He planned every step. Nothing was left to chance. One day, he found an old book in the back rooms of the gas station. This book became his guide. The dark rituals it contained provided everything Darren needed to gain the powers he sought. Now, he would not be satisfied with mere thoughts. He would bring these rituals to life in the real world. Darren began by gathering the materials necessary for the rituals. His victim's blood was the most important ingredient in these spells. But this blood could not be obtained in an ordinary way. The rituals had to be performed in a specific order. So, Darren planned every step carefully. Darren waited patiently to choose his first victim. He was not one to rush. He waited for the right moment. One night, a lone truck driver who stopped at the station caught Darren's attention. The man was tired and sleep-deprived. This was the perfect opportunity for Darren. He invited the man inside and offered him a place to rest. The driver, accepting Darren's kind offer, stepped inside. But once inside, Darren's dark plans took action. "Darren, it must have been a long journey. A little rest will do you good, truck driver. Yes, I'm really tired. It'll be good to close my eyes for a bit here." Darren led the man to a small office room at the back of the gas station. This room was his secret chamber where he performed his rituals. When the man entered the room, he noticed the strange objects inside, but it was too late to turn back. Darren closed the door and suddenly attacked the man. The driver, helpless in Darren's grasp, died as his blood was drained into a special bowl. This was Darren's first great victory. There was no turning back now. He had stepped onto a dark path. Darren's first victim increased his power. But for him, this was only the beginning. After completing his first ritual, he felt stronger and more determined. He was no longer just a gas station worker. He was someone who had obtained his own power, performing rituals and taking lives to strengthen his dark arts. In the town, the disappearances of Darren's victims began to be noticed. People talked about the increasing number of those who disappeared after visiting the gas station. But no one dared to accuse Darren. Outwardly, he seemed quiet and calm, but this calmness was a reflection of the darkness within him. As the number of missing persons increased, the police took action. Because the town was small, such incidents immediately attracted attention. The fact that the last place the missing people were seen was always the same gas station heightened the police's interest in Darren. One day, the town sheriff visited Darren. He wanted to ask him a few questions. "Sheriff, Darren, have you noticed anything strange around here lately? There have been a few missing persons cases, and the last place they were seen was here." Darren responded with his usual calm demeanor. "Darren, no, Sheriff. Everything here is the same as always. There aren't many customers at night, but I haven't seen anyone go missing." The sheriff seemed to believe what Darren was saying, but deep down, he felt something was wrong. However, he didn't have enough evidence. Darren, on the other hand, was aware of the sheriff's suspicions and decided to be even more cautious. As Darren realized the police's growing interest, he became more careful in choosing his victims. But this caution only deepened the darkness within him. Each night, he sought a new victim, eager to take their life. One night, a couple arrived at the station. They were arguing, and their tension caught Darren's attention. The couple's conflict showed their vulnerability. Darren invited them inside, offering to help. But this invitation was leading them into a deadly trap. The couple entered the back room without realizing Darren's plan. But this time, things did not go as planned. The woman let out a scream at the last moment, and this scream was heard by a passing driver outside. The police arrived at the station immediately and caught Darren in the act. When the police raided Darren's house, they encountered terrifying scenes. Skulls hung in the rooms, dried bloodstains on the floor, and strange symbols etched into the walls were evidence of Darren's horrific crimes. Even when faced with all this evidence, Darren remained calm. But the darkness within him had now become uncontrollable. "Police officer, Darren, you need to explain what's going on here. We know what you've been doing in this house, but why? What were you trying to achieve?" Darren looked at the police officer with indifference. The darkness within him had completely taken over, and this world no longer held any meaning for him. "Darren, you wouldn't understand. This was just the beginning. You're ordinary people, but I am the master of darkness." These words unsettled the police officers even more. Darren's calm demeanor, despite the situation, further demonstrated how dangerous he was. They immediately took him into custody and sent him to one of the most secure prisons. But for Darren, this was merely a physical confinement. His spirit was still free under the influence of dark rituals. After entering the prison, Darren was completely isolated from the other inmates. No one was allowed to approach him, and only necessary items were brought to his cell. But this isolation was not a punishment for Darren. It was an opportunity. In his mind, he continued his dark rituals. The prison guards began to be disturbed by Darren's strange behavior. It was nearly impossible to communicate with him. From his cell, strange mutterings could occasionally be heard, as if he were talking to someone. This situation caused a sense of fear to spread among the guards. Even those who didn't know about Darren's involvement in magic could feel the strange energy around him. During his days in prison, Darren prepared for one last ritual. He would now perform this ritual not in the outside world, but in his own mind. One night, using a few pieces of material he found in his cell, Darren prepared a rope for himself. This rope would be the tool for his final ritual, Darren's inner voice. The time has come to leave this world. My soul will be free, but the darkness I leave behind will never end. After preparing the rope, Darren quietly began to chant a prayer. This was his final prayer, a prayer made to separate his soul from this world and reach eternity as the master of darkness. He placed the rope around his neck and hanged himself. As his body left this world, his soul remained under the influence of dark rituals. Although Darren's death brought a sense of relief to the town, the traces of the curse he left behind continued. The dark rituals he had performed became the subject of fear-filled stories among the townspeople. Everyone believed that Darren's house was cursed and that what had happened there would never end. The townspeople were too afraid to even pass near the house. That house had become a grave, carrying Darren's dark soul. The echoes of dark rituals could still be heard inside, and the symbols on the walls were never erased. Every night, strange noises were heard inside the house. Every night, strange noises were heard inside the house, as if Darren was still there, his presence lingering in the shadows. The fear of the unknown grew, and the once lively town began to fade into a somber, haunted place. The house became a symbol of dread, a place where darkness had taken root and refused to let go. Darren's dark legacy turned into a horror story passed down through generations in the town. Even years after his death, the traces of the dark rituals he performed remained. The young people of the town grew up hearing these stories, and no one dared to approach Darren's house. One day, however, a new family moved to the town and decided to buy the house. For them, it was just a cheap piece of property, nothing more. But on the first night they moved in, they began experiencing strange occurrences in the house. Symbols appeared on the walls, eerie whispers were heard at night, and an unexplained coldness filled the room, signs that Darren's spirit was still there. The new family was forced to leave the house after a few weeks. They, too, began to believe what the townspeople had been saying all along. The house was cursed. Darren's dark legacy continued, a reminder of the horrors that had once taken place there. Years passed, but Darren's story never faded from the town's memory. To the townspeople, he was more than just a gas station worker. He was someone who had mastered dark powers. The rituals he performed and the lives he took left indelible marks on the town's consciousness. Darren's tale spread beyond the town, becoming an urban legend. People spoke of his cursed soul still wandering the town, of the dark rituals he performed that continued to affect the area. No one knew how much of the story was true, but everyone felt a chill when they heard Darren's name. The house where Darren once lived still stands, abandoned and forgotten by time. The townspeople avoid it, and nature has begun to reclaim it. Vines creep up the walls, the roof is caving in, and the windows are shattered. But despite its dilapidated state, there is a sense that something lingers there, a presence that cannot be seen, but is deeply felt. Inside, the symbols etched into the walls remain, defying the passage of time. The rooms are cold, unnaturally so, and anyone who dares to enter quickly feels the weight of the darkness that resides there. The house is a testament to Darren's legacy, a place where his dark rituals still echo, trapped in a loop of eternal repetition. The town has changed. New generations have come and gone, but Darren's story remains a part of the town's fabric. His name is whispered in hushed tones, his deeds recounted as warnings to those who dare to dabble in the dark arts. And as long as the house stands, Darren's curse will continue, a dark stain on the town's history, a reminder that some evils never truly die. Stories 3. In one of the desolate regions of America, there was a seemingly abandoned gas station where only passing travelers stopped to refuel. This station was the only place to stop during the night on that lonely road. There was nothing around. No town. No houses, just endless darkness and an eerie silence. The station's owner, an old man named Carl, had been running the place for years. He was the only one working there. Carl's silence and cold demeanor always made the customers feel uneasy. There was a constant look of worry on his face, as if something bad could happen at any moment. That night, after midnight, a car appeared on the deserted highway. The car slowly pulled up to the gas pumps. The person who got out was a young woman named Emily. She had been on a long journey and needed to refuel before reaching her destination. But as soon as she stepped into the gas station, she felt something was off. When she entered the station, Carl was standing behind the counter. Emily greeted him, but Carl did not respond. The old man's eyes were fixed on the empty space behind Emily. She turned around uneasily, but saw no one. "Are you alone?" Carl asked. Still not taking his eyes off the void, Emily noticed the oddness of the question and replied, "Yes, I'm alone." Carl said, "Then be careful. These roads are not safe," and added quietly, "If you think you're alone, you might be mistaken." Emily couldn't make sense of Carl's words. As she returned to her car after refueling, Carl only gave her a glance. In that glance, Emily saw a fear she couldn't describe. When she closed the door and started the engine, she felt as if someone was watching her through the mirror. But when she looked back, there was no one there. As Emily was about to continue on her way, her car's headlights caught a human figure emerging from the darkness. The figure stood in the middle of the road, as if waiting for her. Emily watched the figure with fearful eyes as its face began to materialize. The figure was staring at her with a blood-stained face. Emily's heart raced. She couldn't muster the courage to take her eyes off the figure. After a moment of hesitation, she pressed the gas pedal and sped away. But the figure's eyes were etched into her memory. After that night, Emily was never heard from again. She became another lost soul swallowed by the darkness of the night. But Emily's disappearance was only the beginning. The next day, a police car pulled up to the gas station. The officer who stepped out, John, had been investigating the increasing number of missing persons cases in the area. Emily's car had been found abandoned a few miles away, but there was no trace of her. John decided to speak with Carl. Carl was again behind the counter. When John began questioning him, the old man's answers were short and cold, lacking any logical connection. But John noticed something hidden in Carl's eyes. As John was inspecting the gas station, he found some strange symbols in the back storeroom. These symbols were marks of a dark cult. When John turned to ask Carl why these symbols were there, the old man had disappeared. John was determined to uncover the mystery of the station. He discovered that, according to old records, the station was connected to horrifying events that had taken place years ago. A cult had once lived here, performing dark rituals. The souls of the people sacrificed in these rituals were trapped at this station. Later that night, John decided to leave the station. But just as he got into his car, he noticed someone sitting in the back seat. When he looked in the mirror, he saw Emily's terrified face. In a moment of panic, John turned around, but no one was there. Yet, the feeling wouldn't leave him. As John drove away from the station, he began hearing disturbing noises throughout the night. The car's interior felt as though someone was breathing into it. Suddenly, the steering wheel jerked out of control, and the car veered off the road. When the car finally came to a stop, John found himself in deep silence. There was no one around, but the voice persisted. "You can't escape this place." John tried to get out of the car and run, but with each step, he sank deeper into the darkness. At the end of the road, he saw the figure waiting for him. The figure slowly approached, and the last thing John saw was a bloody hand emerging from the darkness. After John's disappearance, some police officers decided to bravely return to the gas station. A special team was formed to uncover the mystery behind Emily and John's disappearances. But the deeper they dug, the more complex and incomprehensible the station's secrets became. Later that night, the team entered the storage building at the back of the station. Inside, there was a chilling, cold, and stifling atmosphere. They found strange symbols on the floor and an ancient book radiating dark energy. The book was filled with ancient texts explaining how Carl had unleashed the curse upon the area years ago. This curse was born from a massacre in the village and had buried the soul of the gas station in darkness for years. The team decided to perform the rituals described in the book to reverse the curse. However, as the ritual began, the station's lights flickered, eerie whispers rose from the walls, and the ground shook as if a deep chasm was opening. Suddenly, a reflection appeared in a mirror hanging in the storeroom. It was John's shattered soul. With blood dripping from his mouth, John warned them, "Get out of here. Don't try to stop the curse. This is the devil's last trap." But the team, ignoring John's warning, continued the ritual. John's image quivered as if trying to escape the mirror. Overcome with fear, the team members couldn't take their eyes off the mirror. Then, a dark figure suddenly appeared. It was the demon, the leader of the cursed souls of the station. The demon attacked the team in an instant, rendering each of them helpless. Their souls were ripped away and vanished into the darkness. Only their empty bodies remained, their spirits trapped in eternal darkness. The storage building suddenly began to collapse. The gas station, bearing the weight of years of curses, could no longer stand. But something strange was happening. It wasn't just the building collapsing, reality itself was unraveling. The team, the lost souls, and the demonic forces all vanished in an instant. By morning, there was nothing but a vast emptiness where the gas station had once stood. No trace or remnant was left behind. The area remained a place forever buried in darkness and mystery. No one who passed by on that highway ever remembered that there had once been a gas station there, and no one ever set foot in that spot again. But the legend lived on. At night, those passing by could still hear faint whispers, see a shadow brushing against their car windows, and would try to speed away as quickly as possible. It was a reminder of the devil's last trap. This place was never truly erased. Deep in everyone's minds, there remained a fear, a reminder of that cursed night. And so, the dark history of the station continued to exist beyond time. This horror story would be forever remembered as a tragedy where every soul that entered the station was dragged into eternal darkness and could never escape the devil's hunt. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to my channel and like my video. Thank you for your support.